Hey, deserving listeners. Today we have a special guest on the podcast, Brendon. He was introduced to me by Catherine, my cousin, who is actually a colleague of mine at Antioch University, Seattle. She told me, oh my God, I have this student at Antioch. You have to have him on the podcast to talk about a lot of different things, namely old Seattle, grunge culture, music culture, mental health, all that kind of stuff. This discussion, I don't know how relevant it's going to be to mental health interested listeners. So, we'll just see what happens. But I wanted to talk with Brendon because I like reminiscing about the old days. And so I just wanted to, find out what his experiences were and see maybe where we overlap at all. So welcome to the podcast, Brendon.
Thank you, Kirk. Good to be here.
Yeah. This is the Psychology in Seattle podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Kirk Honda. I'm a therapist and a professor at Antioch, along with your supervisor, Catherine. So Brendon, where do you want to start?
Wow. Big question.
Because I could start.
Yeah, I'd like you to throw the rock in the water
how old are you?
first. I'm 51.
Okay, so I'm 49.
Yeah.
And where did you live in 1989?
Oh my God. Where did I live?
Which I sort of consider to be like the ramp up of grunge.
Yeah. In 89, I think I was still trying to be a college student in Ellensburg.
Okay.
At
Central Washington.
Yeah. But I got more caught up with hanging out with the Screaming Trees and perhaps indulging in some drinking and forgetting about my studies a bit then.
Okay.
Back then.
And so Screaming Trees are from Eastern Washington. Did they go to Central Washington?
Yeah, I don't know if they were enrolled at all. I want to say no. Maybe Mark Pickrell was.
Okay.
But I can't remember. But yeah, they grew up there.
Okay.
So I had a great chance of hanging out with those guys a lot.
So if you don't know, Ellensburg, middle of Washington State, it is such a farming beef town that as soon as you come in off the mountains, you get this waft of dung and old beef factories.
Yes.
And Central Washington University is in that town as well. And so you have all these farmers and beef people and Central Washington, generational people. And then you have this influx of college people who don't really fit in culturally, shall we say. And so you went to Central Washington and the Screaming Trees. And so, again, if you're not aware of early Seattle rock, or I guess early 90s rock, this conversation might not be very interesting to you. But for me, the Screaming Trees were a really special band to me. The singer, Mark, what's his name? Lanegan, yeah. I followed his career. He had a solo, I think he's still solo right now, if I understand.
Yeah.
And I've just always respected his artistry and his dedication to not doing poppy things. And I think he's still in Seattle, if I'm not mistaken.
I think Mark lives in LA, in the LA area. I know where. I'm going to keep it kind of covert. But yeah.
So you knew the Screaming Trees when they were small. This was before they got big. They were probably playing clubs. They were probably
Hal Holmes Center, which is a famous venue that Nirvana played. Well, actually, the Nirvana's famous. I don't know if Hal Holmes Center is famous, but the Trees played there with Nirvana a few times. And,
okay. So the Screaming Trees always seemed, from just the way they look, like a party band. The two guitarists just looked like they could
the Connor brothers.
They could have good time.
They did have good times. Yeah. That was a really fun band with, as most are, in my opinion, like diverse. My famous bands almost have so many, they have so many similarities amongst the guys, but then they're so diverse as well. And it leads to this sort of tension that creates what they had. And Mark Lanegan was no stranger to tension. And
what do you mean?
We always used to call Mark like a 50, 60-year-old man in an 18-year-old body. His soul and his being, it's like he was a curmudgeon is not the right word, but sort of a grumpy soul even then. And it wasn't a joke. It wasn't a put on.
Yeah.
He was just this guy. Like,
well, that's really interesting because it matches his artistic style.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
It does.
Yeah. So did you know, or did they know they were going to be big one day?
Not a clue. Not a clue.
Yeah.
No. No. I mean, there were shows, at, I think I don't know if they rehearsed at New World Video, which was a video store, not DVD even, a VHS video store in downtown Ellensburg that the Connors' parents owned, Van's parents and Gary Lee Connors' parents, bass player and guitar player. So they rehearsed in the back, and sometimes they would rehearse while they were open, which was great. You walk into the video store and it's just, you hear booming in the back, and the Connor parents were totally proud and supported them in their arts, and it was just a cool vibe. And so I kind of gravitated to that more than the books, I suppose.
So just to, because I'm interested in this, have you been in a band?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you've been a musician over the years, and so have I since high school, and I've been in that space of practicing where you can. No one really wants to hear you. You play small clubs. You drag your friends and their friends.
Yeah.
They say, yeah, it's good or whatever. But were the Screaming Cheese, when you saw them, were you like, oh my God, these guys are amazing?
No, I mean, we, like, looking back at those times, there was only a couple bands that we saw that we thought, oh my God, this is unreal. The rest just seemed like what we were supposed to see, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like we enjoyed, when I say I've had these discussions with friends about the past. We knew what was going on, meaning we knew there was some cool stuff happening. We didn't know it was going to be called the Seattle scene or grunge or anything like that. But I didn't look at that. I didn't have that sort of A&R mentality of a talent scout to go, wow, they're amazing. I was just hanging out with them. We were drinking, going to shows.
Well, for me, in the late 80s, you had all the hair metal bands, and you had all the R&B acts that were big. And, you had Whitney Houston and Janet Jackson and Michael Jackson and Vixen and Poison and Motley Crue. And, you had bands like Queensryche, which was from local, but definitely...
Bellevue, I think.
What? Bellevue, right, exactly. But had a much sort of... poppier sense of how to dress and how to act and the way to sing. The guitarists were good at their instruments, and
trained good.
Yeah. And you hear these local bands, and they were just like my band. And I remember hearing Bleach and just thinking like, okay, it's fine. It's not amazing, but there were countless other bands that I heard that were just as good as Bleach, or that style of like not really caring how you sound in a certain way. It was a very lo-fi sound.
It was okay to not know how to play.
Right. And not care that much about how you come across. I mean, so the bands I was in during that time, there was that dichotomy that I think a lot of the bands did, Kirk Cobain included, which was, secretly wanting to be big and famous, but like also really strongly holding the value of like, I'm not going to try that hard.
Yeah.
If it happens, great. And I'm not going to shy away from it, but I'm not going to beg for people to listen. And I'm not going to write songs that are that are obviously geared towards entertaining. And I remember when we would play during that time, and it was before Nirvana and all those other bands. I remember, just as a story, so 1989, me and my friends, we were in a band in high school, and we had written this song to play at the talent show. And I think it was the last, they were putting us on at last, the sort of finale of the talent show at high school. And we'd written this song, and we're about to go on stage. It's literally like 5-10 minutes before we're about to go on stage. And the three of us are talking, and we're like, I don't want to play this song. I think it's kind of dumb. I don't know who said that. And then we were just like, okay, well, let's do something else. And we're like, okay, well, what do we do? And we're like, I don't know. What if we what if we just did something that really annoyed everybody? And we're like, oh, that sounds fun. And George Bush was president at the time. And so we did this whole thing about, or I made this whole song about Nixon and Bush, you know, the first Bush. And we ended up throwing our guitars in the air. And then 2 years later, we see all the bands on MTV 2 or 3 years later, Nirvana, all these other bands, dressing the way we dressed, talking the way we talked, not giving a fuck the way we didn't give a fuck, giving a big finger to the audience a lot of the times. And I think the Screaming Trees, and you know, I don't know about you, it's where you know that cultural zeitgeist from the Northwest that for a weird second became the biggest thing in the world.
Oh, wow, weird second, weird decades. But it is unbelievable to think of how big the scene and the bands in Seattle became on the map. No one cared. Like, you were flipping off, throwing your guitar, and that was happening in your vacuum somewhere. And then in Ellensburg, it was happening. It was happening in Montesano. It was happening in Aberdeen. And it was happening, you know, around.
And where did that come from, you know? Because it was like, where did we get it from?
Blue collar, merge. You know, for me, I think it's a hybrid from, I mean, listen, anybody that says they're not a metalhead from Seattle is lying, I think. Because metal is Seattle. You talk about Queensryche, there's Metal Church. There's these other metal bands, and you know, Jerry Cantrell, Lane Staley from Alice in Chains used to be in metal bands. Alice is a metal band,
right?
To me, and
early Soundgarden.
Yeah, that's metal, but it was different metal. You know?
But better metal. It was
better metal. It was interesting. It was more thoughtful, but it was hybrid in a sense that it had that angst and dirtiness of punk rock, but it did not have the glam piece to it. So Seattle dropped the glam, and had a lot to say because we were in a vacuum up here. No one wanted anything to do with Seattle.
Right.
Bands would stop touring when they look at the map and they're like, no, I'm not going all the way up there.
Right.
You know, especially when you start hitting the months of winter.
Yeah.
You know, no bands are coming through here.
Yeah.
So it was amazing to get touring bands come through early on at like Guerrilla Gardens and Metropolis, to have like Sonic Youth come all the way here. And Black
Guerrilla
Flag.
Gardens, was that in Seattle?
Yeah, it was a punk club on 5th and Jackson that I used to go to all the time.
Because I remember the Central being around back in the day. I also remember the Ditto. Do you remember the Ditto?
Yeah, of course.
Do you remember the owner of the Ditto?
I remember of the owner, but I
can't remember his name. He was an Italian guy.
Yeah.
And I was best friends with my guitarist, you know, in my band. We both play guitar, and we spent a lot of late nights at the Ditto with the owner. And so there was the Ditto. There's
Squid Row.
I don't remember Squid Row. I remember OK Hotel.
Definitely OK Hotel. There was an interesting thing that happened in Seattle, which seems like a good jump in to do this. In 79 to 85, there was like the Showbox. There was Graven Image, which was run by Larry Reed, who used to manage the UMIN. He has Fantagraphics books now in Georgetown.
Yeah.
So go check that out.
Yeah.
DIY was in full, do-it-yourself was in full-fledged underground.
Fanzines
were started. Touring bands would come through. Circle Jerks, Black Flag, Bad Brains would come in. You know, it's like amazing stuff was coming through. Minutemen, Husker Du, all these great bands that were called alternative were coined, were finding their way up here. And our bands, there were bands here like The Farts, Soldier, early punk rock stuff that ended up being the formation in the ground, the foundation of what everything was built on.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't have it. You can't have all the success without all that. So what happened was they had the Guerrilla Garden, Metropolis opened for a short stint. And I say this with, not knowing everyone's calendar in the world, of course, but maybe one of the best 18 months of shows in a club's history in terms of what I loved. Unbelievable shows that were there weekend after weekend. And that was over on 2nd Avenue in Pioneer Square, 2nd and Main. It's a teriyaki place now.
Huh.
Anyway, that ended, and then it went over to the Guerrilla Gardens, 5th and Jackson. And then in 1985, it was the Teen Dance Ordinance.
So did you go to high school in Seattle, just to chime in here?
I went South End. So I didn't go in Seattle proper. Yeah, with my mom. I was living with my mom in the South End. So I'd always take buses in Auburn, actually.
Oh, Auburn.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah, way out there.
Yeah.
And before I moved into the city.
Yeah. I grew up in Sammamish, if you know where that is. So outside the city as well.
So the Teen Dance Ordinance, basically, there was a death at the monastery, the goth club. And it was a kid that was had parents that were dignitaries in Seattle of sorts, and had some power, and they were pissed, obviously, that their daughter had died, the drug overdose. And they went after the club, and it was just, there were all these little brush fires underneath. The city could not understand who these kids were with the punk rock, and they wanted us out, and this was the straw. And they put in effect called an order called the Teen Dance Ordinance, which basically shut down every all ages club in Seattle. Every one of them in 85 shut down.
Wow.
And you couldn't get a venue to open.
So you were young you were like...
Yeah, I was like 14.
Middle school.
Yeah,
and
14, 15.
High school going to these places.
Yeah.
So these were all ages, not just 18 and up, but they were kids too.
All ages.
Wow.
Yeah, like, there were some younger kids than I was there.
So you were cooler than I was, because I was going to places like Omni and
I remember those in Renton, right?
Yeah, and it was all ages.
I remember the Omni.
And they had the top 40 dance room with Skritty Politti and all that kind of stuff. But then they had the sort of goth dance floor, and so that's where I would go with like Depeche Mode and that kind of stuff. But I didn't even know about this other scene.
Yeah.
That was going on.
That's the thing that's so beautiful about it. It set up the groundwork, and then all of a sudden it ended. It was just this end. So we had to go to Natasha's in Bremerton. So we'd take ferry over, and there's that famous Kitsap Ferry riot that happened after the GBH show over in, I think it was at Natasha's.
Why riot?
Just punk kids.
Yeah.
And taking seats apart on the boat, and it was just a madhouse. I wasn't actually on the boat. I remember wishing I would have been on the boat when I was a kid. But, the police were waiting for everyone when they got to Coleman Dock in Seattle. And so a lot of folks got arrested. But
advertising the Rocket, or were people just knowing where to go?
Never. Yeah, we just knew. That we always talk about that now, too, is like, how did we know where to go?
Yeah.
And that kind of gets to the flyers. Like, I would go to shows, and I would take flyers down, which those that don't know what a flyer is, it's a 8x10 or 8.5x14 or 11x17. Xerox, essentially, or they call them offset copies. And I would hunt all of the shows. So I would go basically look at the telephone poles and the walls and see what was coming.
Yeah.
And I would take them down, fold them, and put them in my pocket. And that was how I remembered the shows.
So I think if you look to your left, you'll see an old flyer maybe that I put up. Do I have a flyer over there?
I don't see one.
Oh, well, I used to have one up there.
Yeah.
Of my band, you know what I mean?
Oh, cool.
Of where probably three people showed up, you know what I mean? But yeah, I mean, that was a big part of being in a band back then, was you would go to like a Safeway or something with the 25-cent copy machine or 5 cent or whatever. And you would try to create something that would entice people to come. And you're trying to advertise the style of music, because there's no way to go on Spotify and find out what does this band sound like. You have to look at this black and white flyer and figure out, is this the sort of event I want to go to, or are people going to be there? And and because of the fact that none of us had computers or whatever kind of programs you do.
Nothing.
You just have pens and you have magazines that you could pull pictures from, but you got to get your Reagan picture in there or something. And you try to make it seem cool. And so I remember spending a lot of time on those things. And then stage 2 is like, okay, well, now we got to put them all up.
Yeah, you got to put them all up. Did you know Chad Slam Blake?
No.
His name was Slam Hate. We called him. He I don't know where his nickname ever came from, but and his name is Chad Blake. He was the poster hanger So you'd give him like $10,
and he'd just go all over.
He'd go around the whole city, and he would put your posters up everywhere. And if you knew Chad, you had a good thing going, because he would spread the word and all the right telephone poles.
Oh, yeah.
He's still around. He works at the market. So shout out to Chad if you ever hear this. But anyway.
And now you have an art project coming out.
Yeah. And so these flyers that we were using back in the day to get the word out, the do-it-yourself model, because no one cared. No one wanted to help us. So everyone was just figuring out how to do it on their own.
By the way, it still kind of is that way today. I mean, now flyers are on Facebook, for example. Yeah. But it's the tradition lives. The tradition lives, but the I guess the medium is different. The tools are different.
The tools are different.
Yeah. Like now you have you have free software in your computer that probably allows you to composite a thing,
which makes them cleaner and different than
but
they
people
were.
will make composite on their computer that make them look grungy, you know what I mean,
of course,
give that flavor.
The cut up letters and all the great stuff that came out with collaging flyers and all that stuff. But yeah, so I collected throughout my lifetime, and I have a pretty great collection. I'm actually selling pieces of it here and there. But I have a show right now up at Cafe Vita in Seattle. It's an artist.
Which Cafe Vita?
Cafe Vita on Capitol Hill.
Okay.
Yeah. And I look at them as art. And
so you've been to the Central. They have that whole one wall with just all those old.
Yeah. I got a bunch of old Central flyers too.
Yeah.
Soundgarden.
Right.
Bunch of stuff that the old Central was a great stomping ground. But yeah, so Vita, the flyers are up. His name's Raymond Pettibon. He was born Raymond Ginn. He's a brother of Greg Ginn, founding member of Black Flag. Raymond created all the art for the band. The 4-bar logo.
Oh, he did.
Everything.
That was
decided in the name. Everything is Raymond Pettibon.
That was genius, because when I was in junior high, I remember seeing a lot of people with Black Flag written on their folder or this sort of thing. Also, obviously, Dead Kennedys. So it was Black Flag, Dead Kennedys. And I'd see that stuff, and I considered myself to be not uncool. And I'm like, so you're cooler than I am? And I remember
there's another level.
Yeah, I'm like, who are these people? And I went to a house party one time, and I finally got my hands on a Dead Kennedys record. And I was like, this must be the best music. I mean, I see this symbol everywhere. It's graffitied in the bathroom. I put it on the record player, and I listened to it, and I'm like, this is shit. I mean, Dead Kennedys, it's an acquired taste. You know what I mean? Black Flag too. I mean,
I guess all of it is, and
that style of punk. Just to let you know, is not for me. Husker Du was one of my favorite bands of all time. Yeah. Some people would put them in the same category. I do not. So, Screaming Trees, Husker Du, to some extent, Circle Jerks, I really liked. But when I got into the Black Flag, Dead Kennedy stuff, it's just like, I get the appeal, particularly live. I can't imagine seeing them live. It must have just been
amazing. It was incredible,
amazing.
Yeah, they were
But
great.
Hearing them on vinyl, like on your tiny little hi-fi, stereo, it was just like, I don't know, not for me. So then I started going around in school and thinking, there's no way that uncool kid likes Dead Kennedy. And so I would say, what's your favorite Dead Kennedy song? And they'd be like, oh, well, I don't know. And then me and my friend figured out like 99% of people with Dead Kennedys and Black Flag things on their folder
have no clue.
No. But it was what the symbol meant. I mean, you saw that Black Flag 4 bars.
Yep.
You were saying something about yourself.
Still to this day, people rip off, or let's see, maybe not rip off. Some do. Greg Ginn will find you, though. I will let you know that he will find you if you're ripping off Black Flag. He put a cease and desist on me when I was trying to sell a couple Black Flag shirts online. Oh. He had SST Records shut me down for selling Black Flag shirts. He is all over that. That's why he's, probably still successful in his own way, but that's also why he's not liked by a ton of people, and he's the only original member of Black Flag.
But you wouldn't have it
opinion.
You wouldn't have it any other way, right? It's not like when you're in Black Flag, you're out to make people like you. You know what I mean?
No, but when you don't pay bands and you don't pay your own band members, and you're running SST Records, which Soundgarden had a record on, Screaming Trees were on SST. A lot of great bands. SST had a lot of cool stuff, and Pettibon did all the artwork. for all that stuff. So anyway, this flyer shows up at Vita through the end of February, and
what's the response?
It's been great so far. I've actually sold 3 pieces.
Which ones? Like,
I sold the first proper LA show at the Hong Kong for Black Flag.
Okay.
And
was it a Black Flag fan or was it?
Yeah, he's a fan of Black Flag. He's also a fan of Pettibon, actually.
Oh, okay.
He thought he was going to see Raymond Pettibon at the show, and he was disappointed to see me there. But he was floored by it. He bought a set list from the Mountaineers show, 1984. In Seattle. It was a set list that I ripped off from the stage.
Do you keep all your old flyers for your band and your old set lists?
We don't have any of that stuff.
I have.
I don't even remember having a set list on stage.
I've kept a lot of that stuff. Yeah, like
I don't even remember the songs we played.
Like a set list on the back of like a, what do you call it?
A flyer.
No, like what do you put under a beer bottle?
A coaster?
A coaster, right. Mm-hmm. So backside of a coaster, that kind of thing. So I want to get back to something and hear your experience of it, because I'm just curious. As you said earlier, growing up in Seattle or the Seattle area, we were like the ignored part of the country.
Yeah.
And if people did know anything about us, they thought we were like Alaska, or I don't even know if they said it rained all the time. They probably just said it was like, I don't know. It's like the wilderness. It's like we're bears and Sasquatch, Bigfoot. And that's all that they knew, if anything.
Yeah.
And so I grew up in a time thinking, working class, Boeing, a lot of, guys with riveting on the side of a plane, and their wives and their kids. My dad worked at Boeing. My aunt worked at, I had a lot of people. And so when I would travel, wouldn't be that often, people would say, "Where are you from?" And I'd be like, "Oh, I'm from the Seattle area." And people would be like, "Huh?" And I just remember it I'm guessing currently other places in the United States where it kind of be like that. I guess maybe Anchorage, if people say they're from Anchorage, there's not a lot of pride where you can like go to other places and be like, "That's a cool city." As soon as Nirvana became big, within weeks, it just completely shifted, and it never looked back. Whenever I travel now, I say, I'll be in France. I'll be like, I'm from Seattle. I'll be like, oh, Seattle, that's a cool place. Yeah, they'll say Nirvana, and
huge band,
but also
bigger than they were then. Now.
Right, and so it was this total change, and I didn't realize it at the time. I remember noticing a bit of it on MTV. They were doing like a red carpet event or something, and they were asking, or maybe it was in the Oscars, and they were asking people, and they asked, what's her face from Fatal Attraction, or anyway, they asked her, what's your favorite Seattle band, and she's like, oh, well, Soundgarden. They were asking all these celebrities.
Yeah.
That was the main question of the day, was like, what's your favorite Seattle band?
Yeah.
And so, suddenly now I had all this pride of where I was living, and it was never apparent to me as much as I had some friends who were women. They went down to LA, and LA was always like way cooler than Seattle was. LA was just like, a billion times cooler. Music, culture.
Oh, I mean, it had everything: film, TV,
the beaches,
music, beach, and celebrities, the Lakers, everything.
And Seattle was just like this shit town,
lunch pail town, like you described.
Yeah, like marshy and gross and moldy and mildewy.
Kind of is. It
yeah. And so these women, they're friends of mine. They're 22 or whatever. They go down to LA and they come back and they're like, so I was at this restaurant, and these guys came up to me and they were hitting on me, and they said, "Hey, we're from Seattle." And the girls were like, "Oh, we're from Seattle too. What part of Seattle do you live in?" And the guys were like, "Oh, well, like Seattle. I live in Seattle." Well, what part of Seattle? Oh, well, just in Seattle. Like, they weren't from Seattle.
Yeah, right.
They were lying. That was their pickup line. Seattle was such an impressive city that it was literally how some guys are trying to bag babes. That was their initial thing, and it apparently, maybe it worked, or they thought it would work or something. But what was your experience of that?
Yeah, I mean, I remember being on a trip. I was touring with a band, and I ended up in New York, and I had my friend had his father worked for TWA back in the day, and somehow he gave me a friends and family pass. So I took this ticket, open-ended, and I was flying around Europe. I ended up in Greece. This is when I really realized. And I'm on a bus going into Santorini, and they're playing Nirvana on this bus. And I was just like, wow, like this is huge. And I had a Seattle hat, and I had long, twisted, knotty things in my hair, like somewhat dreads, but it was just, it was the grungy look, whatever. And then I realized, and people saw my hat. I think I had a Seattle hat on or something. It said S on it, Mariners maybe. And people would grab it, just come over and talk to me. I felt like a celebrity almost and so it was weird to think that, because no one wanted a piece of it. No one wanted anything. And then now they want everything. And that's why when you meet a Seattleite, a true Seattleite, and it's a little grumpy that you came here to work for Amazon, this is why. I mean, it doesn't mean we hate you. It's just, it's changed so dramatically that, change is inevitable, right? And we always say growth is optional, right? But the change was so huge that, it flipped the city upside down fairly quickly.
Right. The population, I would guess, is over half of the people living in the Seattle area didn't even grow up in Washington State.
No one that lives here from that day, not no one, I shouldn't say that, but it's sort of split the old heartbeat of Seattle up, because it's forced people out of their lofts and their apartments and stuff that can't afford to live in Seattle. The affordable Seattle, lunch pail Seattle is no longer. Yeah. So, you got folks, friends, that are living out in South End, North End, East, because they can't afford it here. But
well, that's why Georgetown became kind of a center, because it was very cheap.
Yeah.
Because it was, the property values were so low. I remember when that started to happen, it was like people were talking like, well, we can't live in Belltown anymore because that's too expensive. And we can't live on Capitol Hill because that's too expensive. Can't live in Ballard anymore. That's too expensive.
Which is insane to me, Ballard, by the way. Know. That's the one that always gets me.
Me too.
I'm like, I only went there to drink at Hattie's Hat.
Yeah.
And looked at that place like, holy shit, man, this even spooks me a bit. I got to get out of here. There's nothing going on.
Yeah.
And now it's
the premier place to live in Seattle.
Crazy.
Yeah, I lived in Ballard in from 90 to 92 or something, and whenever people would, and I had a friend who lived just up the hill, like from Ballard, and I remember when people asked her where she lived, she said she lived in, I think she said Fremont. She was so embarrassed to say Ballard that she, because she was on the border, borderland, and Ballard was just like the worst place you could possibly live.
Where, like, we would go like, God, it's so far.
Yeah, it's so far.
If there was something there, I lived downtown most of that time, and you're like, God, Ballard, man, how do you even get there?
Yeah.
Like, where is it?
Yeah. And essentially I live in kind of northish Ballard right now, it's just seeing that flip, and how, it just makes me wonder, if grunge never happened, if Nirvana just never happened.
Would Amazon be here?
Right.
Would any of this have happened?
Well, Microsoft would have, because it was already kind of getting going.
Yeah, Microsoft was here.
But would we have self-esteem?
Me, you and I? Or
about living in this town, you know what I mean? Like,
like wearing it as a badge, you mean? Like,
or even just talking about it, would this podcast be called Psychology in Seattle,
There's a lot of psychology in Seattle. We could get into that.
So let's talk about that.
We could get into that. The nuances. I'll start by saying, like, in punk rock, I found my tribe. Like, to overlap psychology about the belonging, the sense of belonging, how important it is to find that connection. It's when I found the music, the lyrics, the anger, the speed, and the expressiveness in fashion and otherwise, I was like, this is how I'm feeling inside and out.
Yeah.
And it was a great experience to connect with like-minded folks, and we didn't go talk about our feelings amongst each other, but we all knew we had the same stuff.
Yeah.
And that was the core stuff that people don't know about that particular scene, is it brought a bunch of people together. People call them misfits or throwaway. but we were like, you know, we had divorced families and stuff like that. That was felt embarrassing back then. Like, we don't have our family together. We're like, what is?
Do you remember the first moment when you heard that style of music and it touched that part of your identity?
Yeah, I mean, that moment, my friend Stacy really kind of turned me on to them. She had a bunch of the music, and she turned me on to a lot of the stuff. So I have to credit Stacy.
How old were you?
14. 15.
What was it? What do you?
I remember her playing me Necros, which is just an amazing punk band. Like, that was my first experience with listening to punk rock, going, holy crap. I had heard, I was kind of like of age for the second movement of punk, which was like the hardcore movement.
Yeah.
There's the early first phase, and then it went into more hardcore, which kind of the Black Flag. I mean, and then it got angry and violent stuff, which it wasn't really in the 70s at all.
Is Bad Brains considered 70s?
Yeah, I mean, Bad Brains would be considered late 70s, early 80s. For sure. Yeah, I mean, that's one of my favorite bands of all time.
Yeah, they're so good.
And then I went to their show.
Do you like Circle Jerks too?
I love the Circle. I'm friends with Keith Morris and Xander Slosh. They're
lighter punk, right? Because if I liked it, like...
No, they're not light.
Oh, okay.
No. No, but they're popular. They're like the kids with the Circle Jerks on their Peachy and Black Flag in the bars. When those bands came to town, we had other people that weren't in the scene. Because, mark my word, when we were going to see, the Farts and Soldier and, 10-Minute Warning with Duff McKagan was in that band. Silly Killers, Duff played in that band. Green River with Mark Arm and the Mudhoney guys.
Did you see them?
Stone. Oh, yeah. Malfunction, which was Andy Wood, who was later, Mother Love Bone singer, R.I.P.
Did you know him?
Andy. Yeah. Not well, but my friends knew him.
So the guy at the Ditto told me, Richard Paletti, I think it was his name. He told me that he gave Andy Wood his first drug experience.
Oh, fantastic thing to brag about.
Yeah.
I mean, just saying. Which ended up killing him.
Yeah.
But there was a lot of strong heroin in Seattle, but that's a whole different subject. Or maybe it's not.
Well,
but that's the belonging piece that really was important to me, that ingrained in me, like, this is a tribe I belong to.
Because it was such a preppy decade, right? You had your metal guys, and you had all your preppy people, and you had the punks, I guess.
New wave
people. But that was the dominant kind of group, was the clean cut.
Always has, always will be.
Tom Cruise and all those people. And for me growing up, I think it's because I'm half Japanese or something. I've never really felt like I was a part of any group. And so I definitely had like a few toes in the preppy group. Yeah. And I was captain of the football team, captain of the wrestling team. I was a jock too. But I definitely had, toes in early goth, what we called bat cavers. Did you call them bat cavers?
Yeah, of course, yeah. I always ended up dating that type of girl. I
bat caver?
Yeah, like a goth girl versus a punk girl for some reason. So I got turned on to all that stuff. By the way, I was thinking I was hardcore and stuff. And when she took me to see like Specimen and Skinny Puppy, and it scared the shit out of me, actually. I was like, and of course you can't say that, you're a kid, you're a punk kid. And so I was sitting there going, this stuff's garbage. But I was blown away by it, and also horrified.
Like what were they doing?
Just the darkness and the
like
sound,
the blood and
it wasn't even blood. It was just like there was no stage lights, they were backlit. And it was like, I don't know if you've ever seen Skinny Puppy or Ogre on stage, but it was like, Jesus Christ. And this guy, and you're 14 years old.
Yeah.
It's like, if a parent had a choice, they probably wouldn't say, yes, please be exposed to Skinny Puppy.
Yeah.
But Alien Sex Fiend was another one. Still amazing stuff today. I mean, it's not.
For me, it was hearing Could You Be the One by Husker Du. Mm-hmm. So, I didn't have friends like you did that had, these kinds of records. And I had friends that had new wave stuff like Talking Heads and Depeche Mode and The Cure. I got that kind of through friends. But, MTV had 120 Minutes, which is late, Sunday night, and I would watch it because that was usually my favorite music. They for example had the Posies, which was a local band.
I know
you know those guys too.
I got a good Posie story.
Okay, good.
Kind of good.
And they played "Could You Be the One" by Husker Du, and it's one of their very first it's Warehouse. It was an album that I think they thought maybe we could actually kind of sell this to the general public. It was sort of 86, 87 or something. Mm-hmm. And when I heard "Could You Be the One," I was just like, it just spoke to me in a way that no other song had before. I mean, music had spoke to me before in other ways. For sure. It wasn't like I hadn't been moved before, but this was something I had never, it was a part of my soul that I'd never felt sort of resonating in the world, And I got my dad to, when I was at Bellevue Square, to buy me that double, vinyl record. And I listened to that and I, recorded it onto a cassette tape and on my Walkman. I'd walk through high school and I remember just listening to Husker Du and just loathing the stupidness of high school, that intimate experience of just like, what are we doing here? We're just the world is so stupid, and people listen to this podcast know I frequently will talk about that. So I obviously have had that narcissism since I was young, but anyway, that was my moment was "Could You Be the One?" And then when I heard Nirvana, I was like, oh my God, they must have listened to Husker Du, because this is like the next, the next chapter.
Yeah. I mean, the pop sensibility is,
right. And melodic, hard, angry, simple,
not angry
raw
enough in some ways for a lot of us. And that's the thing that was great about growing older a little bit, is revisiting some of the stuff, and falling in love with Husker Du when I wasn't. Truthfully, I was like they weren't for me hard enough. They weren't heavy enough. And I needed that, loved that.
Even those early albums, Candy Apple Grey, those
still wasn't
hard
enough.
Not
when you listen to, when you're listening to, Necros and
totally,
DOA and stuff like that. It just doesn't compare, but it does. I mean, there's the, the whole Replacements, Bob Mould, Husker Du thing, right? That carries that particular style.
Yeah.
Which ended up being more so the 120 minutes kind of stuff.
Right.
So.
Yeah. So what's your Posie story? Because it was one of my favorite bands in the late 80s.
Yeah. So they, God, I can't remember what year this was, but Bumbershoot, they were going to
opening for Soundgarden?
They were going to open for Psychedelic Furs.
Okay.
And the Psychedelic Furs canceled,
and
they added Soundgarden.
I was there.
So was I.
So
and we felt
I
so
have a story
bad for
too,
the Posies.
But I want to hear your because the audience.
I hated the Posies.
Right. So were you in the pit?
Yeah, throwing beer cans at the Posies.
Oh my God!
I'm sorry, Ken Stringfellow and folks today, and John Auer, that I hope I didn't hit you with a can of beer. But
Okay, so let me tell my version, and you tell yours. Okay, so I love the Posies, and I know Soundgarden because I had friends who liked, that sort of music. Even to this day, Louder Than Bombs?
Love
is not...
Louder Than Bombs is it's punk.
Jimi Hendrix? Oh. Yeah. Is not my favorite era of Soundgarden. I like the Super Unknown, when they started getting more kind of, I guess you could say poppy in a sense, or more melodic or something. But anyway, they were fine. And so I go to see the Posies, and like you said, they were supposed to open for Psychedelic Furs, which would have been perfect.
It fits.
Posie,
I felt bad for the Posies.
Posie, Psychedelic Furs, that's a very, synchronistic ticket, shall we say. So Psychedelic Furs, and this is Bumbershoot, which is the big music festival in Seattle. It still exists.
Back when it was free, and there was great music to see.
Back when it, anyone could basically go, and it was packed with all these. Anyway, so me and my friends go, and this is, I believe, the summer of 90, if I'm not mistaken. And so we're watching the Posies, and the people in the front who all kind of rushed the stage, the sort of sort of rougher people who can push people away are right up against the stage, and the nicer people, the Posie's fans, are behind
the nicer
them,
people
like me. And the rough guys in the front are screaming at the Posies. Whenever they would stop playing, they'd get off the stage, fuck you, throwing shit at them.
Yeah, beer cans.
And at some point,
I can't believe I wasted a beer throwing it.
And at some point, John Auer is just like, because he's from Seattle, and I was like, what are they going to do? And I remember John Auer was just like, hey, fuck you. This is our ticket. It's our show. And we have fans here, and you guys in the front, fuck off. We're playing.
That's when they really got it. They got respect out of that, though. I remember like that. I was like, like they stood up to the challenge of it. Even though that was their stage. You're right. It wasn't. We weren't. I wouldn't have been there, and nor would the mean people up front wouldn't have been there if the Furs wouldn't have canceled. But they did, and to date, is one of the best Soundgarden shows I've ever seen.
Right,
and I saw a ton of them.
Right.
That was really incredible.
Okay, that's cool. So
incredible.
So then I. Posie stop, and then Soundgarden starts to play, and I'm like, okay, well, we're here. We're in the, Key Arena or the Coliseum, whatever it was called back then. And I'm like, okay, well, and I see when the Soundgarden starts playing, you mean guys are just going crazy. And again, this is before we called it a mosh pit. No one called, we just
slam dancing.
We just called it slam dancing
back in the day. Yeah.
And so I'm like, I've never seen this before. This is my first, inaugural vision of your world that you had been in for 5 years.
Yeah, right. That Metropolis Guerrilla Gardens world clashing with. Yeah.
Right. And so I, with my friends, I'm like, let's go in there. And so we go in, and to this day, I thought after this experience, I thought, okay, well, I guess that's what, slam dancing pits are like. I've never seen another slam dance pit anything close to this. When moshing became popular later on.
No, it just became violent then.
Well, or it became like a show, or people wanted to show off. Like this was like a very physical, not violent, but scary, but intimate. It was very there was a lot of body contact.
Yeah,
it's just,
and no one wanted to fight each other though. Well, there probably was, but
maybe a little bit, but it was packed in there. And not to get graphic, but I was so being pushed around and battered around and bludgeoned on all parts of my body that my, sensitive areas were getting are more sensitive to that kind of pummeling. And so I had this stocking cap, and I put it down the front of my pants as like a
buffer,
a makeshift jock strap, if you will. And
bumper.
And I remember instantly entering the crowd, and me and my three friends, the two of my friends, we were holding on to each other as we were going in because we didn't want to lose each other. And within half a second, we just got ripped apart, and I never saw them again until the end of the show.
Ever in life, right? Like ever? No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, they're still there.
That was still the end. That was the end of them.
But the moment I remember about Soundgarden, and I managed to push my way up to the front because I'm 6'1", I can make my way up to the front, and. All of a sudden, everyone in the audience is singing some kind of chant. And I'm like, wait, what's happening right now? Like, everyone knows this song, and they're all singing along, with...
Big Dumb Sex, maybe?
It was fuck you.
Big Dumb Sex.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So it's, fuck you.
I know what to do. Yeah. I wanna bleep you.
And so I was like... Man, these people, they're not just here they actually love this band. They know all the words, I remember just
We've seen them for 6 years already at that point. I mean, they were playing the Guerrilla Gardens.
And Ditto, for example.
Yeah. Well, and, way before any of that. And that's what the pride for us is like when this got bigger, when I say us, the core, like folks that were at these little small venues before these big shows. We hated the big shows. I did, and I know everyone else did, because, other people would come in and think that they liked them, or would put them on their peaches or something like that. And so we're really we really held on to like, this is ours.
Yeah.
And when it, and it changed so quickly that we didn't even have a chance to stop it.
Yeah.
In terms of everyone was everywhere and seeing everything. And
so you and I, you might have pummeled my sensitive area during that time.
I mean, still, I'm not that big. I was angry though, and so I did get into some scraps, but what I loved about the pit in the old days and the slam dancing was, you'd get hit. I got concussions, black eyes, bruises, probably a broken rib, and it was part of it. And so it wasn't violent, and you get picked up.
You get
picked up.
Yeah. For people who don't understand, why do you think psychologically you wanted to do that?
It was like a badge of honor. It was like you get in the pit, and even if you get hurt, it's almost like even more of a badge. I remember getting a concussion at DRI at the like a stage dive. Like I went off the stage and the seas parted and looked down and all I saw was concrete, and it was concrete doesn't have any give.
Yeah.
And next thing I know, I was kind of outside, sitting across the street from the Guerrilla Gardens, which is now Carpet King, across from the transit station. And like, what happened? And I was, throwing up. And shook it off, probably had a drink of Old English, and went back in.
Yeah.
And it was that pride of like, when I came back in, I had a little blood, and, it was like the bigger kids too were like, yeah, look at this guy, he's tough. Inside, I was like, holy shit. But that belonging and the big protectors, and Chris Cornell was like that amongst he was always big. He had the body of Adonis. He said it never worked out. People that know him even better say, yes, he did. But he was always, super tall, had the hair, had everything, and he was there. And we knew when Chris was around, it was like he was just bigger. He just had a silent sort of, like, you knew you were okay when you're around him. But yeah, in the pit, it got crazy violent. But at the Metropolis, or at the Guerrilla Gardens, which was interesting, is there were two sides. And there was one side that was the punk side, and the other side that was more considered the metal side. So you'd have hair metal bands playing, and one hallway separating that from punk. And I always say, when the hallway overlapped, it was like Slayer. When Slayer came to town, the punks were like, wow, okay, I can get behind this, but the hair guys are here. Shit, we can't totally love this. But it was violent, fast, and it was just like... And then the metal guys got into the pit, and that's when it got violent. Like actual elbows, they target you, try to knock you on your ass, not pick you up, step on you, and it just became too dangerous in there.
Yeah, I never understood that style. It's a style of dance. I'm sure in 100 years there'll be some anthropology class where they'll talk about the dance of the punks in the 80s, or obsective punks, and you're saying metal, where they do their elbows.
Yeah, your elbows are up to kind of protect your head. So you duck your elbows.
Yeah,
but you duck your head.
But some guys, when they slam dance, they swing their elbows.
And any of the big kids would come along and say, "That ain't cool. Don't swing."
Yeah,
you always you just protect your elbows, like up and down.
Right.
You're not throwing things
like a bummer shoot. That one time, I don't remember anyone doing that. I just remember it was a lot of body contact. You know what I mean? And actually, so just a side note, Antioch. When I teach systems perspectives, which you've taken, I'm guessing. I talk about occasionally about how that mass of people was a system.
Yeah, absolutely.
In that everyone had sort of a goal to see the show, to be packed in there, and every once in a while, like someone would kind of fall down, like the butterfly wings in China, and suddenly there's a tornado in Kansas.
Yeah.
So someone kind of falls, and then the crowd, there would be this wave of movement through the crowd, and then on the other side, people like 10 or 20 people would fall on their ass because it would just propagate through the wave of people. And so the people were a system, and everyone had to play their part, you know what I mean? And although we influenced what happened to the system, we definitely did not have control over the system. No one had control over the system.
No. Yeah. And that's the thing that's when it changed. The no control piece was like, you can't stop these big metalhead kids coming in, swinging and wearing bracelets with spikes on them. Yeah. Which we used to have. There was a law, I think, that you could only have a 1-inch spike back in the day, which is interesting. So if you had an 1.5 inches, which I did on my shoulders, you were trying to think you're a badass because you were going a 1/2 inch past what was legal. I don't know if there was a law, but there was something about the spikes. But they would throw them at you, like try to hit you in the face with them. Yeah. There was a guy out there that used to put nails through his coat. God, I wouldn't. And this dude scared the shit out of me. He had nails driven through his coat, which the sharp end, of course, exposed to the outer. And he had him on his shoulders. And he had the perfect, like, he was totally coiffed out of, like, GBH style. Spiked hair. Looked like he was, ready to rock in London. And smoked during it. And no one got near this guy in the pit. No one did.
So is this a expression of some inner emotional? I mean, as you start to head into treating people, what's the cause of that?
I think belonging is the core of it. I wrote like I think I said already, I wrote a paper early in graduate school called Punk Saved My Life, and brought in like the belonging piece and the emotional sort of, I guess, lack of maturity at the time that we had. But I look at the pit as being the part of the expressive therapy. Yeah. Largely, it was really expressive therapy.
Letting it out.
Yeah. Letting it out. My God, get the best night's sleep after a show. I didn't think about what life was going to be like, hating this, that, and the other. It was like, I remember just going to sleep.
Yeah.
After a show. And, you wonder, like that violent, it didn't, people ask this question, which is interesting. Do you think you have PTSD from that? Which, post-traumatic stress disorder, for obviously, but for listeners, they probably know if they're listening to this podcast. I don't know. It's an interesting question. I looked at it as cathartic. Like really, when I listen to music, it calmed me down. It's like Adderall, right? Adderall is a stimulant, but it's used to calm down those with like hyperactive disorders.
Yeah, people often...
It's interesting how that works.
Right. People often will say, and I haven't seen any research, but it is anecdotally true for me, is that the more angry and more violent the music is, the more calm the person is. You'll find, super angry metal guys and I guess punk guys. When you meet, you're scared of them because they must be. But when you meet them, they're like the nicest, the most giving, quiet, good listeners. And you have to wonder, is that because they have this outlet?
Yeah. And and I look back now based on what I know today, and like you're talking about practicing therapy, is it ADHD? Did I have, what else was going on with me?
Yeah.
At that time that made that feel so good.
Yeah.
And it really did. Not being violent with others, not at all saying that, because there were very few fights when it was just core shows at the Gardens.
Well, the point you brought up was that it was belonging. You could have listened in your bedroom and slam danced into the wall or something, but that wasn't so you could have had the same physical experience without the people.
Yeah.
But the communion and the togetherness and it's almost, there's hints or echoes of going into war or playing a sport with people.
Yeah, right.
You're going into this dark pit and together.
Yeah.
And you come out of it more bonded, closer, and you faced your fears together, and now you're okay.
Now we're okay for that time. It's like those. Lanegan's one of those, I think, that said to me that one of his favorite parts of any day is hour on stage. It's just like, you don't think about anything else but what's going on in front of him. And then it's the 23 hours or the 22 and a half that you have to deal with to get back to that stage again.
Yeah.
And largely that was us too back in the day. It was like I had to go through a week of friggin' school and wait till that next punk show. And it was just horrifying.
Did you see the Lanegan episode with
Anthony Bourdain?
Yeah.
Yeah. They did that at the Royal Room.
Yeah.
Which used to be owned, or the owners of the Royal Room, Steve and Tia, owned the OK Hotel.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Just a little history.
The part of that episode, I love that episode because I haven't really, got to see that side of Mark, and especially, recent days. But the thing that bugged me about that episode was that Anthony Bourdain kept bringing up this notion, and I'm guessing his producers would ask him about serial killers in the Pacific Northwest. Do you remember that part?
I don't remember. I don't know if I ever saw the episode, but I knew he did it.
So in the episode, Anthony Bourdain, this traveling food and cook guy, he comes to the Northwest, and he I don't know how he chose Mark Lanegan.
I do. I can just tell you, he said, I just had this craving to listen to Mark Lanegan and smoke pot.
Oh, okay.
And eat good food.
Okay, so
that's what he said. That's what he said.
He's a fan of
He's
him.
a fan, definitely.
Okay, so he comes to Seattle, and Mark Lanegan's showing him around Seattle, kind of, I guess, and they're talking about the old days and about things that they want to talk about, I guess. And the thing that bugged me was Bourdain just kept bringing up this thing. It's like, Mark, why do you think it is that people in the Pacific Northwest, why are so many of them serial killers? So, and to me, I've heard, of all the associations I have about Seattle, the fact that we have, on average, more serial killers is not really a top 100 things, But for whatever reason, there's a certain section of the internet that, they think, it always rains in Seattle, and they have a lot of serial killers. And it just kind of bugged me. I was just like, and Mark Lanegan, I could tell, was like you and me. I was just like,
how do you answer that?
Is that a thing? I didn't even know that it was a thing.
We used to say that you either work at Boeing, join a band, or you're a serial killer.
Yeah.
That's our jobs. That's our history. That's all we have in front of us. You got to pick one.
Yeah. So, anyway, I was just wondering if you remember that, but, so so the drug of choice in the 80s and 90s for a lot of these guys was heroin, correct?
Yeah, it began to be. And cocaine was big.
Okay.
But then it turned into heroin pretty quickly.
Andrew Wood.
In the 80s, yeah.
Chris Cornell, obviously Kurt Cobain.
Lane Staley. All of them.
Chris Cornell, Andy Wood, Lane Staley all died from Chris Cornell, he might have killed himself, correct?
Yeah, I would like to offer another side of that, even that I don't think he killed himself. But
okay, well, tell us.
I just don't think he did. There's,
you think it was accidental?
I think something happened. I think accidentally, and then it was staged. There's a lot of, I can't cite my sources, but there's a lot of underlying stuff that was happening, and
who would be interested in covering it up?
That's the interesting thing. That's what my friend says. So if that's true, then why would you want to cover it up? Wouldn't a murder be more, if you think your husband was murdered, Vicky Cornell.
So you think it's her?
Yeah.
Okay.
Don't know why. Don't know. I know that those that knew Chris and were closer to Chris and did not like her and do not like her.
What's your take on the Kurt Courtney thing?
Well, let's do that's a whole other thing. He had blunt force trauma to his head, Chris did.
Really?
And broken ribs. The autopsy showed it. It's public information. And not at all. It was never investigated of how that happened. Is it I look at it like we would in psychology, right? It's like theory. Is it possible that he was super high, fell down, hit his head, all that stuff, decided then to get a rubber tubing and hang himself on a door hook that was too short for him? I guess it's possible. But why don't we have any discussion about where the head injuries came from?
Yeah.
Maybe they did come from that, but it wasn't told or wasn't said. To me, it's worth investigating. Yeah. And I know others that are close to Chris feel similarly.
Yeah, I didn't know any of that.
So
that's interesting.
Anyway,
what do you think about Kurt and Courtney?
I've created a conspiracy theory now in Seattle. What a shock. What do I think about that? I mean, it is what you saw. It was that relationship. I mean, I met them several times and worked with Courtney on a photo shoot, and traded clothes with Kurt Cobain, actually. I still have a leather jacket of Kurt's. I did a shirt back in the 92 called Pearl Jovi, making fun of Pearl Jam, and they actually got a kick out of it. And he was in the club where I used to book shows and bartend at the Color Box in Pioneer Square, and I had these shirts there, and him and Courtney and Novoselic came in, and it was the slowest night. It was a perfect night to just hang out because I don't even know why we were open. For some reason, it seemed like there was only 5 people in there. And those that are not familiar with the Color Box had these like big archways with a step up and tables and booths that were kind of secluded. Kurt goes and sits in one of those by himself, and Courtney and Chris came to the bar. And all I wanted to do is go talk to Kurt and almost just say, hey, I don't want anything from you. But I feel like a kindred spirit with him in some ways, what he said, how he acted, what he thought. But so I went back to the bar, and I just decided in a whim, like, I got these shirts. I'm going to go serve those guys beer. Courtney served herself. Of course she did. Reached over the bar. I just shook my head. Like, you can't stop her. You really just can't. She's like a tornado back then.
So just an asterisk on that was back before Uber, you had cabs. And one of the things I would always ask, or not always, but frequently, I would ask cab drivers who's, what's the most crazy story you have as a cab driver? Without a doubt, all of them would say, oh, well, I had Courtney one time.
If they were in her cab, that was the story.
They were like, and she was really high, and she was going crazy, and
I mean, feral.
Yeah.
For a lot of reasons, I'm not judging her for it. That's just the way she was. So I'm sitting, so I go walk over to Kurt, and I said, look, I think you might like this. I just want to give this to you. And I held up one of the Pearl Jovi shirts, and he looked at it, read it, smiled, and he said, cool, that's cool. And I kind of tossed it on his lap, and I was like, no, I want you to have it. And, I go, I don't want to bother you. I'm going to go back to the bar. And he goes, wait. Like he didn't feel right about it. And he stood up and he took off his leather jacket and gave it to me and said, now we're cool.
Wow.
And I said, all right, cool. I didn't say, I go, you don't have, and he goes, no, we're cool now. And shook hands, and I went back to the bar, and Courtney saw that I had his jacket. And of course she's like, that's Kurt's jacket. I basically said, you're going to have to rip it out of my dead hands, because we traded. And then Chris was like, what did you trade? And I held up a shirt. I want one. Novoselic jumps up, takes off his Mervin's pocket t-shirt, which he gave me. Is this good enough for a trade? And I'm like, sure. And I took his Mervin's t-shirt.
So for context, this is after they're mammothly famous.
Yeah.
And
just happening.
Yeah.
Just like, boom, the explosion went off.
Yeah.
And all of the debris was starting to settle, and like, they were Nirvana then. And that was the end of that night. But
so what do you think? Do you think he killed himself?
That one, I mean, I don't have anything to think that he didn't. I mean, I'm open to that. My friend brings up a good point all the time. It's like, as humans, we need to explain things, and things that we can't explain bother us. So we'll end up sort of psychologically picking a side, like he did it, he didn't do it type thing. Because that gray area that ambiguity is too difficult.
Yeah.
I think with his history and everything that was going on with him, I think it's possible, sure, that he did it. I mean, he was not happy, and he had some significant pains in his stomach that he was dealing with.
Chronic.
He had, chronic pains that were suffering in Europe prior. Yeah. So, I mean,
there's also evidence from, me watching what's on the internet and that documentary in which it's a lot of recordings of him. I can't remember the name of that documentary, About a Boy, I think it's called. Anyway.
It is About a Boy.
Yeah. And he was suffering a lot, obviously, from he even wrote song, Pennyroyal Tea, for example, about his stomach and how horrible it was all the time. And he was suffering from a lot of ups and downs of drug addiction to heroin. And then and he was very much in love with Courtney. He had a lot of abandonment and abuse history growing up in his life. Not horrific, but not great. And I believe that there's evidence. I don't believe there's evidence that he had, some pretty major attachment issues, and Courtney really satisfied him in this way because she was so all encompassing that there was no room for him to feel alone, because she was just so present, and she has her own attachment issues as well. And so I think for Kurt, he was just like, oh, I love this woman because she just takes up so much space and she wants to be with me. And I feel kind of,
well, I'm not alone. You said it. I think I agree. Yeah. Like you're not alone with your thoughts.
Right. And then he
never was.
They start to have some issues, So there was talk about separation, divorce, from what I understand. And I think that Kurt Cobain had a extreme negative reaction to that, given his attachment issues, as anyone would. And given his trust of other people to reach out to them, and
which there was none.
Right. And the isolation of being a famous person, I think, to some extent, and really maybe being overly dependent on Courtney and not having other people that he could really talk to. To me, I think there's a possibility that he just had an absolute despair moment and was like, my stomach is awful. I've been depressed for 15 years, maybe my whole life. I've had suicidal thoughts before. I believe me and Courtney are on the way out, because this isn't going to work. What's the point? I've done everything I wanted to do, and it's time to go. I think that there's a pretty good case for that.
A lot of support for that. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah,
I agree, and I kind of leave that one alone to exactly what you said. I mean, there's a lot of evidence that supported that. Whereas with Chris,
because Chris
had depression.
Wasn't he sober at the time? I thought there were reports that he had been in rehab and had gotten sober.
Chris was sober or not sober. It was back and on and off.
Yeah.
And it was one of those things you didn't really hear about a lot. That was the interesting thing about Chris is we knew about Lane's addiction. We knew about Kurt. We knew about Andy even at the time. But Chris was like, I don't know if people were in denial or just didn't want to talk about it, but he was significantly, using substances for a long period of time.
Was it because his life wasn't so much of a train wreck like the other guys?
I mean, like a lot of the stuff we deal with in therapy too is a lot of the origin, attachment, right? Bonding, lack of bonding, abuse as a kid, whether it's verbal, physical, or otherwise, right? And all of those guys experienced that to some degree.
So what is for people who don't understand, why would heroin help with that?
Because heroin makes you feel nothing but pleasure. And the pleasure is numbness. So anytime somebody says they want to check out or, take the edge off, and have a drink to do that, heroin is the extreme in terms of taking the edge off, because it files it down to a nub. And you're essentially just in a catatonic state, which, when you have thoughts and feelings and situations you don't want to think about or deal with, doesn't make them go away, but it makes them go away temporarily inside of you, because you're in this. It's almost like being in the womb, if you can imagine. Being in a womb is just like you feel protected and safe and warm. And
what is it about being...
Until you don't.
Yeah. And then your brain overcompensates by downregulating all those receptors.
Exactly.
And you feel 10 times worse than you've ever felt.
Exactly. And then you say, oh shit.
I need more.
And there you go. There's the cycle.
And heroin is not regulated, so you're like, well, I'm taking a guess as to how much I'm putting in my vein right now. I don't think this is too much, but, who knows? Or you haven't used in a month because you went to rehab and you used the same amount you used before.
Yeah, right. Like Andy Wood was 90 days, I think, clean, and then he came out. I think his was laced, though. I think it was found that it was laced. But he used a similar size dose. A lot of people thought it was that. It was basically it's a shock to the system.
So what is it about being a musician, a famous musician, that would make it even worse, make the suffering even greater, so that one would need heroin even more?
I mean, if you're insecure with $5 and, 5 people at your show, you're probably going to have insecurity with 5,000 people at your show and $500,000 in your bank account.
Doesn't change
who you are.
Yeah.
Fame only exacerbates some of that stuff in a way, I think.
Right, because I think for some people, while you're on the way up, it is temporarily validating and plateauing. But particularly if you start to go down, your shows are smaller, your sales are lesser.
And you start playing at Indian casinos,
right? And although for my band, if I played it in a casino, I'd be elated. You know what I mean?
Right.
But for these people, it's definitely a downgrade, and it can make your suffering and insecurity.
I experienced that when I left Los Angeles and moved back to Seattle. After growing up here, I left and went in '95, went to LA and worked at a major record company. Worked with Rick Rubin, who founded Def Jam Music. Demigod.
What'd you do for
producer?
him?
I was an A&R executive for him.
Oh, wow.
Which, for those that don't know, is the fancy terminology for talent scout.
Yeah.
But we had talent scouts, so if anybody called me a scout, I was quick to correct that. But no, I was a scout. Now I'm an executive, but essentially the same thing. And when I didn't need to be Brendon at that time. I was Rick Rubin's guy, and so my calling got me into anything and everything, and it was, I was associated, and it felt really good, right? I felt, the ego felt really strong, and all the insecurities that I had felt about X, Y, and Z weren't there. Cut to moving back to Seattle and going back to graduate school, and leaving behind the stage, if you will, which was my career. The career that also had the built-in friends, the built-in entertainment, everything was that. It was all in. You had everything. There was never a shortage of anything to do because there was always something going on. And then having all of that removed and moving back to Seattle in the winter, going to grad school, which is in a vacuum. Really couldn't really connect with too many people outside of that during that, starting to work in mental health and realizing, God, if I feel this way, like when the party's over, turn off the lights, or turn out the lights, as Morrison said, I think, right? The lights were off and it was like, shit, this feels bad. I thought about musicians and artists that once you get a taste of that fame, and if you don't have your cultivated your emotional maturity and dealt with some of that stuff.
Your attachment security.
And your attachment security, which no one knows about.
Right.
Unless they come see us.
Yeah.
No one knows about that. They just feel like that suffering or that particular pattern of behavior in life is just the cards that they're dealt with.
Yeah.
But, until that, I never really had a taste of it. And I'm like, if I'm feeling it from this, I wasn't a star. I was known in this circle, but
correct me if I'm wrong. A lot of musicians would be kissing your ass.
Every one of them.
Right. So that is a certain fame vibe.
True. Yeah. I mean, it did have all of those things. It just
Any
wasn't
musician
magnified.
You would meet who knew who you were would just be like, please.
Especially if knowing I was Rick's guy.
Yeah.
Because working with Rick, I mean, everyone seemed to think that was the best thing since sliced bread.
You're King Midas. You could just decide like you're the next thing.
Yeah, or Rick would decide essentially.
But you're the bouncer into
I'm
the
club. I got the guest
room.
list. Yeah, right. Which is probably the most important job at a club, if you ask anybody, is the bouncer. You gotta know the bouncer,
right,
and the bartender. But yeah, I mean. And it sucked for a long time, and I didn't know what I was feeling. And then I was like, how do I be social? I didn't realize that these things existed or didn't exist in my life, rather. So I can't imagine what it's like to be a musician, a sex symbol or whatnot. You start receding hairline, age life takes over, and all of a sudden you're playing country fairs, and I see that, and it depresses me. And so I wonder how the folks feel about it. Like, but I think it's also an acceptance of periods in career. Not everyone can have U2's career. Not everyone has the Rolling Stones' career, right?
Right.
None of them. No,
Yeah. Virtually no one has the Screaming Trees career.
Well, yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Like essentially, statistically.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's the other thing. Once you do sign a record deal with us, which is a 1%, then 1% of those signed make it.
Right. So
maybe not that low, but
so you know all about this. So,
yeah.
But and maybe you can fill in the gaps here. But so I'm 19, 21, 23 in a band, trying to become the next Smashing Pumpkins, or something, because that was more my kind of vibe back then. And incidentally, I'm forming a Smashing Pumpkins tribute band.
Oh, nice.
And so that's what I wanted. I was still in college at UW. I was still, doing what I wanted to do in terms of business and making a career. So I wasn't delusional about it. But I thought, maybe, because especially back then, I would see, Kirk Cobain wears a Melvin shirt, and they got and then boom, they're selling millions of records, and I was just like, I could
Melvins.
Yeah,
they didn't quite sell a million, but they did get signed to a major. I know what you mean.
I mean, but they were on MTV.
Yeah, a lot of bands got signed that no one would ever touch. It was they fished the pond dry up here.
Meat Puppets, it was like, I mean, obviously Meat Puppets had an audience, but not that big of an audience, and it just seemed like every band was suddenly, gigantic from Seattle, and so I thought, there's a chance. And we had agents that were interested in us, and people were interested in this. One guy was interested in us. He was actually a drug dealer and had a lot of extra money and wanted to get into the scene kind of a thing.
For some, that's a perfect person to be interested in their band.
Right. He was the nicest guy. He was the nicest guy and would just hand money to us. And so he paid for us to record in Ballard at like the premier studio, and I think it might even still be there. I'm not quite sure. And it was this nice studio, and so there's two stories that I wanted to tell briefly. One is that so at UW I got a business degree because I thought, well, I might not be famous as a musician. If that doesn't work out, well, I'll own my own recording studio because I like to produce. Like right now I'm doing a small version of that with the podcast. And so I talked to the owner of this recording studio, and I was just like, "Oh my God, you have my life. You have this beautiful studio, da da da." And he's like, "You're gonna hate it. I hate it.
You don't want it."
Yeah,
right?
He's like, "It's like you think it's getting into the music business. It's not. It's getting into the business of desperately, lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling, hoping that you book enough days in the recording studio so that you can pay your bills. You never get a chance to have fun in your studio, because if you're having fun in your studio, that means another band is not paying for the time in your studio. And and it's this big headache, and most of the 99% of the bands that you record, you hate. It's just like some shitty country band.
Yeah, when you have to do it for the money.
Or some some Microsoft exec who wants to be in a blues band.
Their son they want their son to make a record who doesn't have any talent. They pay.
Yeah. Some engineer had to engineer, that one girl's song, that Friday song, "Gotta Get Down on Friday." You know what I mean? And he's just like, this is what I got into, So that's when I discovered, I guess I don't want to do this. The second conversation happened around the same time. There was this band, a friend of mine, his cousin was in this big band, Reef, from England. I don't know if you remember, they had a hit song anyway. They came to Seattle, and they played the Sit and Spin. I don't know if you remember that.
I remember that. Laundry.
Yeah, and so, and they had a club in the back, and I, because I knew the guy, I talked to him, I was like, you have my life. Like, you're touring the world, you have a hit song, you're like top 10 hit on the Billboard charts, you have an MTV music video, like, this is amazing. And he's like, let me tell you what my life is like, in his British accent. He's like, so this is my first hit. So my contract with my label is not very good. So I'm getting almost nothing from the sale of that.
He has to recoup all the costs going in.
Right. And I get I think you said something like $32,000 a year. And I'm traveling every day. And I never know where I'm going to wake up.
8 a.m., 7 a.m. wake ups to go to a radio interview.
Yeah. And I'm eating at like McDonald's, and it's a drag. And I was earning more money than him at the time. And I'm like, what? And then he says, if I don't have another hit record after this, that's it.
That's it.
That's it for me. I will net no money from this experience. And I was like, oh my God, there's no chance I'm going to be as big as that guy. Like I want to be, I want to be like as big as maybe Hammerbox. That was was always my kind of thing.
Right.
It's like, well, if I can be as big as Hammerbox, then that'll be great. And it painted the whole picture. And I was like, so if that's your financial and your life, Hammerbox they must all have day jobs. Do you know what I mean? And so that's when everything shifted for me anyway, of just like, this is a hobby. This is for fun.
We never thought, it's interesting hearing that. It's like, because you had the backdrop of the success, like, to look at. You were looking at the success from all the bands that got signed and thinking of signing as a success, right? Because it's one step toward something different.
Yeah.
And
you were that guy the Midas touch.
It's interesting. I went from not caring about any of that and hating that and stay away to that guy.
Yeah, you were the man.
I ended up being
But for Rick Rubin,
but yes, and gratefully I had that experience with Rick, because I could still be kind of, I could be cool. There was a good side with Rick, right? Like you could bring in something really artistic and off the wall, and he might dig it.
I mean, aside from what's his face in Minneapolis? What's that cat's name? He did In Utero. What's his name?
Steve Albini.
Steve Albini. Aside from Steve Albini, Rick Rubin was like...
Oh, he's 100 times.
But I'm just saying, like, in terms of, like, respected business...
I mean, he is the demigod of producers, really.
Right.
I mean, you can't name anyone that has cross-collateralized, meaning, like, Dixie Chicks to Chili Peppers to Slayer, Johnny Cash.
Beastie Boys?
Beastie Boys early, when he was... when he started... Def Jam with Russell Simmons, they had the Beastie Boys and LL Cool J, like Public Enemy, all that stuff they found together.
Yeah, and for context, Rick Rubin is a giant white guy with a
not giant anymore. He had I'll just say this: he's skinnier now.
Okay, but he's tall. No,
maybe 6 foot.
Okay,
yeah, 6 foot.
And has 5'11". long. He looks like
he's a long beard.
He's in ZZ Top,
but he's super thin now and tan, and it's weird to see. But he looks healthy.
Is my description of trying to get the Midas touch accurate? Did I have an accurate picture of what my financial and life prospects were like? Even though it was never going to happen, but that was the golden ticket I was trying to grab for, and it wasn't. When I found out it wasn't really a very desirable thing, did I have an accurate picture?
I think people still wanted it, no matter what. You could tell them 10 out of 10 bands we signed failed, you'd still want it, because you'd think you're the one that would succeed, and most bands had that. So
you would see that, you would be talking to bands, and they'd have that
no clue that they're shitty.
And starry-eyed, they're just like, we're going to be the next big thing. And you're like, no, you're not.
No, you're not. You're not even going to be a thing.
Yeah.
And I had, I was on panels a lot too. So, being Rick's guy, being on panels in, Manchester at an awesome conference called In the City. That was pretty amazing. And had a lot of it, one-on-one time with Seymour Stein over there, which is an A&R legend. He signed the Ramones and Madonna and everything in between.
Did you sign anyone big?
Well, my claim to fame is Brandi Carlile, local star. And I discovered her. But the downside, going back to the downside of Rick, is you could bring in that alternative, that really wild thing that he might like, whereas most major record companies would not allow that. But on the other hand, you couldn't bring in a modern rock band like a Breaking Benjamin, which I did, that sold 10 million records, because he wouldn't get it. And I try to sell him on the business of it. Like, we can make money on this so we can do all these records. He'd already done that with Def Jam, so he didn't have that sense of urgency or see it that way. He would just say, no, I don't want to put that on my label. And I didn't disagree with him, but it was also one of those things that, like, had those things happen, my career goes different directions. I mean, we showcased the Killers, and they were going to sign with us until some shenanigans happened.
What do you mean? What happened?
Well, over the weekend, we were going to sign the Killers to American Recordings, and we had almost a red line copy, which is a final version of the deal, ready to go on a Friday. And I think there were a couple deal points, like, we'll get those on Monday, you know, type thing. And we came in on Monday, and I noticed a serious sort of depressive vibe with my GM and the other A&R guy that I worked with. And I was like, what's up? And they told me that the Killers signed with Island. Now, at that time, Island Def Jam was our parent company. Rick was a boutique label at a certain point in his career, which meant he just plugged into labels and brought us as talent, scouts, A&R execs, and used the marketing, publicity, and all the record companies' different staff. So he didn't have to hire his full staff. And then there was a joint venture deal put together on that. But there was a no compete that wasn't held. It wasn't held, and they ended up taking that deal, and so that stuff happened.
Does that mean that you earn less money when that happens?
Yeah, it means significant. I mean, if you look back, you're the A&R guy that signs the Killers, which was Rob Stevenson eventually, from Island Records, and he ended up being a president of Capitol, and you get royalties. As an A&R guy, you get royalties.
Oh, you do?
Oh, yeah.
So you get...
As long as you stay at the record company that you signed them at, as soon as you leave, your royalties leave.
Oh.
That's
when you get hired, they say, if, you get X amount percentage of the sales of the bands that are attached to you. It's sort of like...
points.
It's sort of like when you walk into a jewelry store, if that's a commission, essentially.
Right. Yeah. I mean, when the net, after everything's paid... the net earnings of a song or a record becomes 100%, 100 points, and you got to dole out those points. So a producer like Rick would get 10, 15 points, which turns out to be whatever that 100% left is.
And he gets a good deal because he's Rick Rubin, right?
Yeah, and used to get very huge producer fees, front end, back end, and points. I mean,
other producers might not get anything.
Not anything close to him.
Yeah.
And most of producers are hustling, like you described earlier, like recording bands they hate.
Yeah.
A lot of them are because of the world.
What was your point? What was your points?
I think as an A&R guy, you got 10 points or something.
Really?
5 points. 5 to 10.
So if you could, your whole career could be on one band.
Oh, totally.
Wow.
Yeah, my friend signed Nickelback, which he doesn't brag about, but you know what? He's got a smile on his face. He bought a house in New York.
For the rest of his life?
Well, not
as long as he stays.
As long as he stayed, and he left.
Oh.
But when you leave, you use that success to garner a bigger salary when you go somewhere else, for sure.
Okay.
Yeah, you get promoted. And something in records, you typically had to leave to get promoted.
Yeah. So when you saw all these bands, because... there were times when I was playing in Seattle and we'd play with other bands that I didn't know. And I'd be like, oh my God, that band is amazing. Like they're playing as shitty clubs as I am with as few people coming to their show as I am. But there's something obviously awesome about that band. I remember there was this one band I played with at the old Ballard Firehouse. And they were sort of a Red Hot Chili Peppers kind of thing, which is a hard thing to pull off. It's a hard thing to...
Don't get me started on the pep.
But it was a fun, polished, style that was hard to pull off anyway. And great voice, great stage presence, great hair. They had it all. And I was like, man, that band's gonna make it. And then, a year later, we're playing with them again, and they're still playing these shitty shows. And I was like, I thought for sure like someone was gonna nab them up. So from my little microcosm, I'm seeing like these really great bands from my sort of comparison. You're on the other side of this chasm where you're seeing like the best of the best, right? And what is that like? Because, you're probably seeing bands, you're like, yeah, you guys are awesome, but this is never going to work because X, Y, and Z. Like, what was that like?
Far and few between. Like the Brandy Carlisle, I mean, that's a lifetime artist, and I really honestly knew it then. I knew that she could have a career as long as she wanted to. When after I met her, saw her, listened to her writing, and those are not a dime a dozen. Those are far and few between. So like on the outside, a young girl sitting out there or a young boy that's just like, I want to be like her. I love that. Go do it. Go try it. Yeah, definitely. Pursue your dreams. I'm not trying to shut that down, but like not everyone gets that far. There's 90 other singers that didn't. And what makes her so special, in my opinion, is her voice, her artistry, her ability to write songs, her commitment to the craft, her knowing the talent around her and knowing that she needs the twins, Tim and Phil, and they contribute a whole hell of a lot to that. They're a team. So when you see that, you go crazy and you want to sign it like yesterday. And
really?
Yeah. Because you're not going to see that again for maybe in your lifetime.
So when you would see something, it would be like, they are the cream of the cream of the crop.
There were different levels. So one, I would be like, the kids like that. I can see that within the kids market, whatever the kids were, the mustache kids living in Williamsburg, New York, or Los Feliz, LA, or Ballard in Seattle. That's kind of hip in that. And it's a business signing. I didn't have, the problem was I couldn't sign everything I liked. So I had to pursue everything, whether I liked it or not, if it could be something that could sell. So there was a lot of stuff that you would see, and those would come in the pitch to Rick. Like, this is not a personal love. I don't totally love it. However, David Geffen and, Guy Oseary, they're looking at this band. If we want to look at it, we should look at it now. They have this song on the radio. That's how all of our pitches would start when we'd play music for Rick. Like, what's going on with this band? And you give them that 411. And then there's times like with Brandy where it was like, I love this. She's incredible. I don't want to build it up too much for your expectations, but I've never heard this before in my modern day. Like a modern day Linda Ronstadt meets like Patsy Cline.
So how does she feel about you?
That's a good question. I think she still feels today we're in touch. I'm forever on her guest list. I flew to New York and saw her just recently on her first Madison Square Garden sold out show. MSG New York, this young girl that used to busk at Pike Place Market, and just the humanness of her crying on stage, and accepting that moment as, wow, I can't believe I'm up here. That's Brandy. I mean, she appreciates everything that comes her way and doesn't take any of it for granted. But yeah, no, I think, she did one of the coolest things. She does a Benaroya Hall shows probably every 2 years with the backing band is the Seattle Symphony. And it's epic. If you ever, well, that's actually coming in February because she canceled the December shows because she had a throat injury. So they're coming up again if there's tickets available. So she's from stage. This is about 4 years ago. I had my whole family there. She gave me 8 orchestra seats, comped, front 5 rows. And she goes, every night I, look at the guest list and I try to imagine, oh yeah, they're coming tonight. Cool. And tonight I found this name and it reminded me of early days. And this guy flew me to LA twice and wouldn't stop. Nothing would be possible without him. All this stuff, she said. And I get choked up telling it because it answered that question that you just said. How does she feel about me? Because I didn't know. I always knew that we were in business but I loved her like as an artist and as a person. And it was returned that night. Like I realized that she was grateful for it. And she goes, you're always the first. And I'll always tell everyone that. And without you, and I'm sitting there with my family. My family's like hitting me in the legs and I'm fighting back tears, but I'm also in the back of my mind going, she better say my name. Like if she doesn't, like what if I almost stand up and she goes, John Ross, and like, John Ross, who the hell's that? then she called out my name and said, this was your favorite song. I don't know if it still is. And then she played Shadow on the Wall, which still remains one of my favorite Brandy songs. Epic moment. Like, I was outside my body, So that is how I'd answer your question, how she feels about me.
Did you think about that feeling when you were getting demo tapes of that, I don't know, altruism of helping someone? Was that on your mind?
That's interesting. You asked that. It was in a different way than maybe one might think. Helping the band, I would be honest sometimes too, to try to help them, to say, look, you don't want to sign here. You might want to go to a smaller indie label and work it up that way or something. This would not be the best fit for you. Because I would be honest that way to help them.
Because the label wouldn't really promote them well enough?
It was far and few between with our releases too. We were very unique, or not unique, but Rick was very particular. So we weren't like Sony churning out 5-6 records a month or a week. Not a week, but a lot of records. We weren't doing that. So, I would be honest. So I would be honest helping an artist that way and coaching them in the music business, right? And saying, this person's cool. I will watch your back with that person, in that regard. And, a lot of me was like, I didn't want him to get signed. And because I felt that, like, knowing that what we know, most don't succeed, and their happiness that was equated to it and all that it made me feel like, God, this is not the right thing. So that's ultimately what changed me in the course of getting out of it, was just like, I can't do this anymore. I don't want to say I felt dirty, but it was like, music business was changed, and my salary was too inflated, and they were, cutting back, and I thought, well, it's time to go. But before that, it was, I don't even remember where I was.
Well, how has it changed the music industry?
It's changing technology. anybody can make a record from their living room, right? GarageBand had been around for a while, but YouTube, the smartphone, and all the bands that became Instagram hits.
So they don't need Rick Rubin anymore?
Depends on what you want. Depends, and, if I were to be... I would, like, this is largely what I did in LA. Like, this is why I felt like this job really helped kind of transition me into therapy and being a therapist, was counseling artists and saying, like, I don't think this is the best move for you. Even if it was something they were super high on, and the honesty that I was bringing to it, I think really artists appreciated that.
Yeah, I was, even after I decided to become a therapist, I decided, okay, I'm not going to open my own recording studio. I guess the music industry isn't very fun, or isn't what I romanticized it to be.
Sure.
And so after graduate, because that was really the only reason why I got a business degree to begin with. And as I was about to graduate, I hear this thing about, no, the career path you're on is awful. And I was like, oh God. So I just started working in business, in Bellevue. I wore a suit and had an office and just worked in market research, but it wasn't my passion. Mm-hmm. I liked it, but it wasn't my passion. And so when I decided to become a therapist, which just popped in my head when I was 24 years old, I thought, ooh, what I should do is I should be a therapist for my tribe, which is musicians and bands.
Yep.
Because bands, I've always said from early in my experience with being in bands, is being in a band is like being married, but you can't have sex to make up. Like
make up or make it worse.
But either, you have all the involvement and all the mutual needs, the sleeping next to each other, the dependency, the bickering, you get annoyed, you get on each other's nerves, but there's no expectation of physical intimacy to actually kind of smooth it over. And so there's all this centrifugal force for people to get thrown apart. And I'm a Beatles fan, and was sad that they ever broke up, that kind of a thing. And the Pumpkins was they had these notorious for all this internal strife from personality clashes. Billy Corgan is, I think, a piece of work, if I'm going to say.
He's got some control issues, I think, I'd say.
Yeah,
some of those.
I think he would admit it, and so. Darcy has drug issues, and anyway. So I think they all did. Anyway, and of course, so did Chamberlain. Anyway, the point is that I was like, ooh, I'm going to be a therapist for bands. So after I graduated, I started, okay, well, now I'm going to hang a shingle and I'm going to advertise myself as a therapist for bands. And guess what?
Nothing happened.
No one wanted that.
That's what's happening with me in some ways.
How so?
It's interesting you say that because, well, when I put together my webpage, I wanted to, of course, being that, like, I could never be the guy, and I no judgment at all. I think it's actually hasn't been suitable for me that I can't put the suit on. I just can't. I will starve. I will go late on my bills, and it's horrifying to me, like, to do that. I don't feel true to it, even though it's like, means to an end. I still have that, that core.
Punk.
That core thing, I guess it's still there, yeah. But people call it lack of maturity now,
Not Seattle.
Not Seattle, yeah. Well, what was the initial question again? Sorry.
Well, so
I got a little drift off there.
Are you planning on becoming a therapist for bands?
So I thought that I want my tribe to come. I think it would be, I'm perfect at it. I did interventions in Los Angeles with celebrities. I mean, it's like, I'm good at this, and they need me, right? That's what I think.
Yeah.
And I put together this website, which was more artistic. And I was like, I don't want to be like anybody else's website. I don't want my picture to look like anybody else's. So
you didn't have a babbling brook with some stacked rocks.
That's what Catherine always says. No lotus flowers for you or stacked rocks, Brendon.
Yeah.
The lotus flower kind of triggers me. So no offense to those that have it. It's just not for me. And that's not who I am, whatever that represents. I don't even know what that means. But so this picture, people were like, yeah, that's cool. It's cool. I have a fedora on, and I'm like pocket square, and this kind of look that I was like, I want to look a little different and capture myself in this picture. And I don't think I hit the mark, and I'm not even in the Venn diagram at all, I don't think, because people are like now saying, yeah, it'd be cool if you ran an indie label, like a record label. That's a great picture. Or an author or something, and I'm like, use it for your bio page, but not for your landing page. And I was
as a therapist.
Yeah, and I was like, shit. And I realized I don't know what a therapist looks like for Brendon. I don't know what that looks like. And in fact, it's happening right now with collaboration from Catherine and others to I actually got a haircut, which my hair was much just messy, and I didn't care. It's still messy, but it's shorter. And now I'm like, back in the game of I need to shoot a new picture because my tribe's not coming. And that doesn't mean they're not going to come.
You're trying to appeal to musicians.
I talked to, my friend Erica Cruzen, who's the executive director or director of services at Music Cares through the Grammy Foundation. And she was super excited to know that I finally got licensed. And so I'm on a referral list for Music Cares clients. Which is a great thing for you artists out there that are listening. If you need support or help, alcohol, drug-related, or financial services, see Music Cares. Look at the Grammy. I think it's Grammy.com. Search Music Cares, and there's always events funding it. Big events, big artists, big people that are sober, and it's a rich. It's a really well-funded program that helps musicians anywhere.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean.
So I do want to see those folks.
I hung a shingle in '97 before the internet was really in full swing, and so there was no way. What was I going to do? Put flyers on telephone poles around the city?
Yeah.
I guess actually that wouldn't have been a bad idea. Now that I think about
yes, you should have.
but maybe it'll work out for you. But what I discovered was, in order to make a living, there's a flow of clients. There's like I just think of this river of of clients that are coming down this mountain.
Yeah.
And you got to get into the river, and you can
stand into the river.
You can stand outside the river and be like, well, I hope a new river forms, or I hope
some of these musicians get out of the river and come find me over here.
I guess, right.
Maybe.
Right,
I'm feeling that way right now. Yeah.
And maybe there's a way to do it, you know what I mean? And it's, marketing and I guess, a stopgap or a compromise is, okay, I'll get into the river. I'll see the regular people that come to therapy, but I'll always be also marketing this other side of me. And maybe in 10 years, half my clients will be the sort of clients that are my dream clients.
Yeah. It's, I feel the same way. I mean, it's what I know. It's my past. It's part of who I am in a huge way. So I want to let people know that I have that past in the history. So if you're like-minded, like thinking, whatever, arts, I'm attracted to artists, so maybe you might be too. I'm also very artistic, I think, in therapy. It's one of those things that I feel is my new art form, and I love it. I love sitting with a person. It's just in being a part of that process for me is really, I don't know, there's just some freedom about it. It's just getting out of your own head, getting into some other space, collaborative space with somebody that has nothing to do with you, which is what I need more of.
Yeah.
But yeah, I need to get in the river. And for the river, to me, Kirk, is I think I'm putting on a suit. And Catherine, and I always go back and forth with Catherine and others. It's like, no, you're you in the river. But I equate getting in the river as some sort of conformity of selling out of sorts. I can't get through, and I don't want to be represented that way. So I'm trying to find, this is happening live and now. So it's interesting this came up. I'm trying to find my way to that. In the end, I'm a therapist for everyone, I think, or most people.
Yeah.
Not just musicians or artists.
Yeah.
But I wanted to use that calling card and that experience. It's a lot of things are experiential, right?
Yeah. I mean, I
don't know where it's going to go.
The sort of optimistic and perhaps Pollyanna-ish way of saying this is, sure, you could, there's a Venn diagram there where you can absolutely be yourself and get in the river. You know what I mean? Why not? But, another way of looking at it because I, as a, supervisor of post-grad people for, 20 and being in private practice myself for 20 something years, I think a long time ago, I gave up on all of that. And I said, look, when people are going on the internet to choose a therapist, which is 98% of the time,
right?
Maybe they get a word of mouth, but then they go to your website and they look at you.
That's the thing, the picture.
It's the picture, and if you look, and I've seen other people look at picture. I'll observe them. They'll look at they'll be like, okay, oh no, it's like Tinder. It's like no,
right?
No,
and maybe you don't even know what no is.
You have no idea.
you just know it's no.
Yeah, you just I don't like that face. That's not the face I want to talk to, and it's complete crap because until you meet someone on Tinder, you have really no idea the vibe they have, how they listen, how you're going to fit with that person. And so, I tell my, post-grad people, I'm like, you have to conform to what appeals to the greatest amount of people if you want to have a successful business as a private practice therapist, which means you can, and what I tell people is, you have to take a number of pictures from people who actually dictate the picture for you, and then you have to give, in a very, objective way, pictures to people that don't know you and say, out of these 5 pictures, which of these therapists would you go to? That's the way to run a business. That's the logical way.
That's the thing that you just said. It's running a business. It's like, do I run, and that clashes with some of, my belief system. And you're right, that's the piece. You said it. I just had to give away all that stuff and surrender it all. And I'm just holding on so tight, and I don't know why I'm holding on so tight to it. I feel like if I jump in the water, like we were talking about, that I lose all that. And I know it's not true. so I'm looking, I'm going to reshoot the photo. I would say this to anybody listening to this, send me an email to my practice if you see my picture. Tell me what you think about it. Use nice language, don't be mean. But I'm at Seattle Sound Therapy is the name of the company, and you can email me at Brendon@seattlesoundtherapy.com. And I do free consultations too to see if we're a good fit. So that's a part of it. This is a shameless plug.
No, please.
But there's truth to it. I want to know what they think. I want to know what people think.
Well, and part of it is I know people listening right now who don't live in Seattle, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Who are just like, oh my God, that's the perfect therapist for me.
Yeah. Tell me why I'd be the perfect therapist for you if you are that person.
Right.
Like if you hear
a
this.
musician who down to earth and, no bullshit. And,
right.
People, there's a lid for every pot. There's a therapist for every client. And as the listeners know, it all comes down to that fit. And
you're right. The pictures does nothing for what's happening in that room.
Yeah.
Nothing, but it gets him in the room.
Right.
And I think that's, so what's and I feel like it's bait. That's the thing. It makes me feel creepy. It's like, I'm like trying to hook you as a client. And the picture of me being me is not right. It's weird.
Yeah.
It's weird. So I'll use it probably for a bio page unless I get strong response to it. But
I mean, a way of, swallowing the pill is, like you said, once they get into the room, they'll get to know you, and then maybe word of mouth.
Yeah.
Because right now you're at a stage where you don't have enough word of mouth yet.
Right.
And maybe at a certain point for me, for example, anyway, I don't have a web page with a picture that's advertised that way because everything is word of mouth. And so the word of mouth will have nothing to do with your picture and everything to do with your personality.
Yeah, right.
So maybe it's, the bouncer is the picture, and, and then later you can slam dance.
Yeah, right. I've got to get on the list first, right?
Yeah. You got to be nice to the bouncer.
I'm
going to be a good boy.
I got to get into the club first.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what you're saying. Yeah, I mean, it's true. And part of me thinks I'm trying to control the outcome too much too.
What do you mean?
I need to let go and just do the things that are proper to set up a business without overthinking it, which is a picture a relatable picture, an honest story, who I am, how I work, and let whoever comes come instead of trying to fish for salmon in a trout pond. Maybe.
Yeah.
I don't know. I did get a musician client, and I have had musician clients, and that's great.
Yeah.
But, it's also a pool I'm familiar with, right? So if I was in LA, I feel like I would be full already, not because of how great I am, but just how many people I know that I could call executives and go, look.
Do you know anyone who needs...
Yeah, and they're like, anyone. I got 8 bands right now that are on the road that they need some therapy. So
See, that would have been my perfect gig, because there was that documentary with Metallica.
Oh yeah,
that they, had their sort of strife, and they went to a therapist and
Monster something
like that.
Yeah.
And I just thought, man, that is like the gig, because I had the feeling that the band hired her as her only client or something, or like half of her week was spent just with the band, and that was always my dream, because I wished that in the bands I was in, I had someone or the money to actually pay a therapist to be that for us.
We could still do it, Kirk.
We still could. Well, let's give it a shot.
I mean, we could. I mean, and just like
it's needed, and
just like the record deal, I might give you a little bit of insight to say, be careful what you wish for.
Why? What do you mean?
Working with a musician is often
I can take it.
Yeah, you probably can. And it's just look. I don't want to pathologize anybody. I'm the first to explain diagnosis by symptom and ask a client how they feel about it. And if they agree with it, if anybody's diagnosed them, before I say anybody is schizophrenic, it's a person with schizophrenia. This is not all of who they are.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of symptomology of just personality disorders that exist prevalent.
Totally.
But it's really, for me, it's an art to talk to somebody like that.
Yeah.
And I think
you would know. I mean, you talk to so many of them.
And you can get a long way on the road. So that model of going on the road and being in their living room and in their office, essentially, is kind of a unique model that we don't get to do. That you don't get to go to your client's house or go to their work in their space, right? They always have to come to our space.
Right.
So there's something to be said about probably the catharsis or the, that could come from that or the efficacy that could come from that. I don't know.
Yeah, and everyone wants it, right? Mm-hmm. The execs want it because they get more productivity and and less risk of canceled shows or missed profits.
Right.
The fans want it because they don't want their band to break up.
They don't want Axl Rose to maybe go on stage.
When Jimmy Chamberlain left the Pumpkins, because of issues, I was heartbroken. I was like, he's 90%. He's 90% of the band.
Yeah, he's great.
And that kind of thing. And so if they only had a therapist, to really, or a team of people to heal.
And why not somebody like me that's been there, done that, and all that to say, look, I understand where you are. And they could look at me and go, I bet he does.
Yeah. Right.
And that trust that, we talk about, right, in therapy, what is it, common factors, right? That the connection between clinician and client is paramount.
Yeah.
They said it's 40%. I think it's higher. I mean, we have to connect.
The relationship, yeah.
Yeah.
So what would be your dream band as a client? Past, present. Past or present.
Now, do I have to go on the road with them?
You gotta be in the mix, right?
I mean, so I'm a person's therapist, 24/7.
You're the whole band's therapist.
The whole band, isn't that I mean, that's like
they're a system.
So I'm like, got to get into my Murray Bowen now.
Yeah, they're a system.
Or my IFS. I love the IFS stuff. But wow, the 4 parts that make a whole, right?
Yeah,
internal family system work. God. I think about, like, if there was an easy one, I'd want this one. If there's a hard one, I want this one. That's a tough question. I would have liked to go back in time to be Kurt's guy on the road.
Okay.
I honestly think he needed people that didn't want anything from him. I didn't want that leather jacket, right? He gave it to me.
Yeah.
But I didn't want anything from him. And I know there were others that didn't, and people that loved him, a lot of people. But just to have... And earn that trust that he listened to me, like, it's okay that, this is okay. Don't worry about this, right? And he could have a buffer. And who knows? Maybe he had some of those folks, but you're asking a hypothetical. So I'd like to be that guy.
Great.
Because there's a part of my arrogance and my narcissism, I guess, that says he'd still be alive.
Yeah.
But who knows?
I don't think that's a stretch. Yeah, absolutely.
But I don't want to get into that. To equate this to saving anybody either at the same time, but it could.
Imagine if he had someone to help him that week.
Or if he'd let them, maybe.
Yeah.
I'm sure a lot of people wanted to, but like we were talking about, people have motives and the label wants it, but they don't do they really want him to be okay? Or do they really care about the money? I mean, it's business.
Well, it's a win-win.
It's a win-win, Silva managing him was a great manager, because I think John actually cared. And Danny Goldberg, and all these other folks that were involved. There were some that cared. A lot of people that cared in his life. But yeah, at the point where he was so shut down and whatnot, I that night when we traded in the club, that I had that feeling of what you just asked me. Like, I want to be in his life for that. And it wasn't it being a groupie or any of that kind of junk.
Yeah.
But
do you remember Sunny Day Real Estate?
Of course. Great. They were great.
Yeah, I loved them. Did you hang out with those guys?
No, I didn't really. They were kind of like when I moved to LA, I think.
Oh, okay.
Like there was that whole next wave with like
yeah.
Death Cab and Death Cab for Cutie.
Right.
Which I just feel like it triggers me to want to punch a wall when I hear Death Cab for Cutie, that name, but whatever.
Their first couple albums I really like, Modest Mouse is around that time.
Modest Mouse. Yeah, and then these bands start getting signed when I'm in LA, and I'm like, really? You like that band?
Yeah.
All right, and they did well. The Shins.
The Shins, yeah.
That type of rock, I think, was all started by Sunny Day in a way.
Okay.
And I think, didn't Will Goldsmith go on to play with the Foo Fighters for a minute until Dave Grohl replaced him?
Well,
I think.
Isn't the bassist of Foo Fighters from Sunny Day?
You might be right. I can't tell you that.
I think that's true.
Yeah. Somebody out there's yelling at us going,
yeah. I'm pretty sure. I'm pretty sure it's the bassist. Yeah. Not entirely sure, but definitely a similar bass style. Anyway.
We're the rock stars. That's what I say. It's like, I came from a rock star era. Man, I mean, these are quintessential icons. Cobain, Lane Staley, Chris Cornell. I mean, even Eddie Vedder. Not even Eddie Vedder, but Eddie Vedder. He's not from here. That's why I said even. But, you know, and then you get dudes wearing jean jackets that look like everybody you'd see in a coffee shop.
Yeah.
Like, for me, I'm like, where's my star? And I struggled with that in LA when we were talking about signing a band. And Rick was with me on it. He was like, we need a star. I want a star. Anybody can go sign a band. We need a star. Yeah. And that's why, like, Brandi Carlile is far and few between.
How'd you discover her? Where'd you see her?
I got a demo from her attorney at the time, Michael Barber, who was representing her in Seattle here, and sent it to me. And he said, you know, I think we and I used to joke, but he'd say, I think you're going to love this. Like, managers and lawyers used to tell me that all the time. And I'd say, stop. Don't ever tell me that. You know, it makes me not want to like it, just being a stubborn ass. But don't, you know, you're not doing your band any justice by telling me what songs to listen to either. Like David Geffen used to say, stay in your lane. You know, you're sending me this and I'll listen to it. And as soon as I listened to it, I had to play it again and again. I remember the moment in my office at Island Def Jam, which is above Hustler Store in Hollywood, right on Sunset Boulevard across from the Whiskey. I'm sitting in that office where there are a lot of fuzzy memories, but this one was clear as day, going, holy shit, what is this? Like, this seems like I'm listening to an old Patsy Cline, Linda Ronstadt type of record, like with harmony and when you hear it, the first thing that happened is my hair went up on my arms. It's like, and that's rare. And so he sent it to me. And then she says, I wrote these songs over the weekend, and she sent, I think, a CD, which I still have a lot of this stuff, with the song Follow, for those that know her, great song, Shadow on the Wall, and I think the story was on there. Like, I just wrote these and recorded these this weekend, and that was the next 3 songs I got from her directly, and I was like, this is done. So I flew up, Seattle from LA, oddly coming back home, met the manager. We were sitting probably as far away as I've ever been in the Paramount Theater. I didn't know it went up that high. Way in the back, these seats. And out comes this dot. I couldn't even see what she looked like. I couldn't at all. It was so far away. And then she started singing and the hair went up again. And I looked at him immediately and said, I gotta have her. I gotta sign her. And you know, she came back I was staying at the W Hotel, her and the twins, Tim and Phil Hanseroth, came back and we, you know, partied a bit and had some fun, and that's when the relationship began. But it was a no-brainer from the beginning, and that I don't think ever happened to me, a no-brainer ever in my A&R days. There was always like,
yeah.
This, I didn't care if she had a radio song yet. I didn't care if she, you know, I didn't think about talent. I know who she was touring with. She was opening for Johnny Lang, by the way, that night. And then she went down to Portland with Johnny, and I went down to Portland with the band, rode down there with them, and watched her again in Portland. And while I'm texting or paging at that time, with a two-way page, Rick going, oh my God, we gotta, you know. And he's like, okay, calm down. But I was like, God, I can. And then it's like the fear of somebody else is going to get her.
Oh, really?
Oh. You know, and you know, you showcase any band with Rick, people know. Right. And if Rick, we got known as they'll showcase anything because Rick would let us. He liked them. He would allow us in the budget to do so. So if we thought we wanted to put it in front of Rick, we would fly him in from anywhere to play in front of Rick. So, but people would definitely say, well, I wonder why is Rick looking at it? It must be kind of cool. So you had a time, you had to move fast if you were going to do something. But yeah.
So now I'm just like asking you random questions. Did you ever meet First Aid Kit? Do you know them?
No.
Swedish? Anyway. What other bands from Seattle back in the day would you... Built for Spill.
Yeah.
Built to Spill, sorry.
Built to Spill.
One of my favorite bands. So that was another moment. fast forward from Could You Be the One from Husker Du to like 92, and my band is playing at Dutch Ned's. I don't know if you remember.
Yeah, I remember. Yeah, on the email, I think you mentioned that, and I was.
Oh, okay.
I was like, yeah, I remember it.
Yeah, it was a very.
It was after I left, or right after.
Maybe
mid 90s.
Yeah, it was a very. They had music every night. They didn't have a stage. They just sort of allocated part of the bar. Right. But they basically just let us play like whenever we wanted for the entire night, and all of our friends would come, and it was just kind of this. Anyway, we'd play there a lot, and I remember someone had put on the jukebox, "Seasons" is the song, "Come Through Me Anytime, fire." Anyway, it's their number 2 on their big album. Anyway, Built to Spill. And when I heard like 5 seconds of that song. It was before the Shins. It was before Death Cab, way before, it was before all that stuff. And when I heard that song, it was like, oh my God, what am I hearing? And it changed everything I understood about what music could.
So rare, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's rare to happen.
Yeah. And so anyway.
And what do you do with that, right?
Yeah. Well, I tried to mimic it with every song I wrote after that point.
Right. And you try to find a band that lives up to it, and you find that it falls short. Therefore, what lies in front of you is something special.
Yeah.
That can't be met. My bar for signing an artist then became Brandi Carlile. And it's like, shit, I might as well pack it up. I'm not going to sign anybody.
Yeah.
Then then leave it up to her to have this. So the Madison Square Garden show, right? I fly in for that. They have a tattoo artist backstage. And I was like, wow, that's cool. I want one. Of course, I grab it. I hear the needle first. I'm like, zzz. Like, I know that sound. I have a bunch of tattoos. And so I was like, where's this? Turns out Amanda Shires was coming to the show to sing with Brandi. She's in the band Highwomen with Brandi. Which is modeled. I don't say modeled, but the Highwaymen, the Johnny Cash, Waylon Jennings, Willie Nelson. I'm missing one. The Four. Anyway, they were the Highwaymen, and so they came up with Highwomen, not Highwaywomen. But anyway, and they were going to tattoo Amanda, and Brandi's like, "Tell them who you are," and so I went and said who I was, and I got the Highwomen tattoo on my arm as I'm showing you right now.
Oh, cool.
And so, just to have, that experience, I'll never forget it. Not just because of the tattoo, but when you have those experiences, like when you listen to Built to Spill, or when I see Brandi, or when you see that show like that, it leaves, it's
spiritual.
It's a spiritual feeling. It's a moving experience where, like, for me, puts me in the greatest headspace, and then it fades away though.
Yeah.
And then what?
That's art.
And art and reality, right? Yeah. We can't sustain that. Like an addict. You can't sustain Brandi at the, she's not playing there every night. Yeah. And if she did, third night of it, it wouldn't be the same as the first night.
Yeah. And now you know why you had deadheads.
Yeah, I know. They're so high though. I don't know if they know a song or no. I worked Grateful Dead shows in Seattle. I always used to say I'd have to get paid, and I did, to see the Dead. It wasn't my thing.
Yeah, not me either.
I worked for Dan Bean concerts in LA or in Seattle, and I was turf lead, which we always joke about. What kind of title is that? Memorial Stadium. We'd have to lay turf down over the field here in Seattle before they let a band and the crowd come on it.
Yeah.
And anyways, 4 days of the Dead. The most junk, garbage left behind by any other band I've ever worked with.
Really?
They're fans.
I bet. Because it's like a big picnic to them, I guess.
Yeah, but it just kind of contradicts a lot of the stuff. But anyway, I digress.
Well, in the final couple minutes here, anything else that we didn't get to you want to share? Like we're talking about here today, a lot of it's identity stuff, I think, that comes up for me in terms of how to look like a therapist today, how to maintain myself. Who am I? How do I correspond visually as well as verbally with folks? And, I think that one of the skills I have and one of the things that I like to work with is that kind of stuff, that
realizing like really the older I get, the less I know about me in a way. And I say that because the more I know, the more I need to know. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
You know, the crumbs or the things.
Well, when you're younger, it's easier to pigeonhole yourself.
Yeah, I'm a punk rocker.
Yeah,
and that's all you have to be.
It's not a bad thing, but it's pretty easily defined, and that's all you need to know. And it defines who you hang out with, and the bands you like, and the attitudes you're going to have, and it's not real. It's real, but it's easier. But once you actually delve into who you are and have some flexibility, then it's just like, and options, then it's just like, well, who am I then?
Yeah. Who am I? How I relate to the world and all of that.
And where do I belong?
And where do I belong? And who belongs at across from me in
Maybe
my
you
office?
should start a Seattle punk therapist group.
Oh, that sounds cool.
I mean, I know there are others.
Huh. Like a group of old punk rockers that get together to talk about how they're relating or not relating to life.
Well, that, and maybe even a marketing, consortium, so to speak, of, mutually referring, or I don't know, just that kind of thing.
I don't know that tribe in Seattle. So if you are that person in Seattle or something, be in touch with me.
I know, I know people who would say they come from a rough background who are therapists, you know what I mean? And don't come from the typical stereotype.
Yeah.
For sure.
Well, I mean, I also want to add to this too, that I'm licensed to work with those with substance use disorder issues. So, and whether you're at Amazon or working at Pagliacci or you are in a band or whatever, if you have, if you have alcoholism or addiction or something or you're contemplative, I like to treat the system, as you're talking about, the system part of it is, treating a client. I've done this for a long time, and treating a client, putting them back into a toxic system is just almost impossible for that person to gain any traction, right? So I like to treat the system, which means, mom, if you're pissed off about your kid or think your kid's taking pills and they're being a teenager, you could come talk to me about that. But I'd also like to do some group work to where we can model some of this stuff. Now, it also has to stay within the bounds of ethical treatment, and not treating too many people of the system. But treating the system is my approach to it. And I'd like to sign on more people than just the client that comes in the door to coordinate with, at least, or to be in contact with, and to have insight on his or her healing in the room.
Yeah.
That's how I like to do it.
Well, thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having me. It's been a blast, and we do it again.
Yeah. So if you want to find Brendon, you can find him at seattlesound.com.
seattlesoundtherapy.com.
seattlesoundtherapy.com.
Or Brendon, it's Brendon at seattlesoundtherapy.com. One thing I would like to say is, my friend brought up, like, well, do you do actual audio therapy? And I was like, man, I didn't think of that. Like, I don't. My name, Seattle Sound Therapy, came out of Seattle sound, like Puget Sound, right? And Seattle Sound music. I also thought of it as that. So am I putting too much of my music in the title and confusing people, right? Like, am I trying to be something?
No, I thought Puget Sound. That's what I thought.
Did you think of it that way?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So yeah, Seattle Sound Therapy. It's my own practice, and yeah.
Yeah. Well,
that's it.
If people are still listening, then you either have no other better podcasts to listen to, or you're actually interested in.
Or you really need a therapist, maybe.
Yeah. Or you're very interested in this extremely niche, kind of areas that we've been talking about, and maybe you're a musician. Maybe you remember the grunge times. Maybe I know some listeners were in the biz as well, and I've nerded out with them over email about, like, so you knew them and you knew that.
Yeah.
It's just one of those things, like, for me. So this has been fun for me. I guess I'll just say that.
Yeah, me too.
So thanks for coming on the podcast, and everyone out there, please take care of yourself, because you deserve it. You really, really do.